Now we got it together. Welcome Atlantic City and Stockton community members, and to some of you, welcome back to our part 2 of our project launch. By a raise of hands, how many of you were at our first launch, our part 1? Anybody returning? Okay, I see Ms. Alfreda Mills waving, a few others. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for returning, and you're in for another treat. So for those of you who don't know me by now, my name is Christina Noble, and I'm the project manager for Stories of Atlantic City. Once again, I'll be serving as your host. We're also joined by SOAC team members, Toby Rosenthal, who is our program coordinator, Erin O'Hanlon, who is the Service Learning Senior Program Coordinator at Stockton, Marissa Luca, who is one of our multimedia content producers and who helped to produce this project, and Stockton's Media, Civil Rights, and Social Change course, Dr. Christina Morus. We also have on the call a few of our student and elder participants as guests today, and I'll introduce you to them a little later in the program. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. This event will be recorded, so please inform us if you do not consent to this. We will do our best to accommodate you. At the end of the program, we will invite you to engage a bit and share your thoughts and or ask questions to the project participants. Please be sure to stay muted until then. But in the meantime, feel free to drop any questions or timely comments you may have for our presenters in the chat. And someone from our team will be manning the conversation. So now I'd like to toss to Dr. Christina Morus, who will offer us one more housekeeping item, and then will give us a brief overview of the Intergenerational Storytelling Project.
I sure will, but Toby, do you have your hand up? Oh, it's just him. Okay, got it. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out, if you were with us last time, you might notice one change, and that is at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see the subtitles. So as we're speaking, it's simultaneously titling it for you. So if this is helpful to you, great. We want everybody to be able to see it. If it is not helpful to you or it is distracting, you can run your cursor down the bottom of your Zoom screen and you should see a button that says CC, closed caption, live transcript. If you click on that, it will give you the option to hide the titles so that you don't have to see them. Okay, so we just wanted to make you aware that it's a new feature on Zoom and we're testing it out. Yeah, we mentioned the recording. So, okay. Other than that, I wanted to say a really big thank you for everyone for being here, for coming to our part 2. We had such great feedback from the original launch event that we wanted to bring you the part 2. I'm not going to take a lot of time here because we have a lot of great people to hear from. Just a few thank yous. Thank you again to our community elder participants, and thanks for you guys keep coming back to see more. Thank you to the Stories of AC team, Christina, Toby, and Erin O'Hanlon and Marissa Luca and fabulous florists, all who worked on this project. Of course, thank you to the students who have been so committed, and to Stockton University, Dean Lisa Honegger and Erin O'Hanlon for the Center of Community Engagement, and of course the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation for their continued financial support of Stories of Atlantic City. In fall 20, so last semester, my Media, Civil Rights, and Social Change class partnered with Stories of Atlantic City's Golden Circle Club. The students interviewed the community elders about their memories of the civil rights movement, their feelings about the Black Lives Matter protests, and their reflections on past and future racial justice and racial injustice in Atlantic City and beyond. The interviews that the students and elders did were then uploaded to our digital story bank, along with the audio, transcript, and any other documents that the participants submitted. And the students created summaries of each interview so that they can be indexed by topic as we move forward. Finally, using the interviews, the Stories of HC team created the living, evolving digital story you'll see today. These are but the first voices. My class this semester is interviewing another group of elders, and their stories will become part of the digital story. And so what began as a spark over the summer has grown into a meaningful intergenerational project, demonstrating the power of community storytelling and the importance of sustaining a space for where the stories of Atlantic City and its people can be told heard, and preserved. Now I'm going to throw it to Christina Noble, who's going to take us on to talk more about the project.
Thank you so much for that introduction and overview of the project. And of course, we're looking forward to the next round this semester. All right, so let's reintroduce you to the elders of Atlantic City. See their lovely pictures popping up now, courtesy of Nastasia Davis, who's one of our photographers for Stories of AC and Atlantic City native. These are some beautiful portraits. So from left to right, we have Mr. Michael Lovejoy Stafford, Miss Jane Gatson Rice, Miss Alma Walker, Dr. Clifford McWater, Mr. Clifford McWater, Dr. Juanita High, Mr. Ralph Hunter, Miss Alfreda Mills, Mr. Ron Jordan and Mrs. Yvonne Jordan, Mrs. Yvonne Preston, and Mr. Volia Hill, who is not pictured. Of course, once again, these are our lovely seniors that participated in the Fall 2020 project. These are the stories of educators and civil servants, military men, historians, community leaders, and more. It was such an honor to be able to listen to their story and now to archive it so that it lives on. All right, let's move on. So now I'd like to give you a brief recap of part one for those of you who may not have been there. By the way, if you missed it, you're in luck. The recording can be found on our website under the events tab. It was truly an awesome and formative time together. So when you get a chance, if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend that you watch it. But I digress, that's my promo for it. So in part one of the project launch, the elders offered us rich insight into their experience growing up in or moving to Atlantic City. They shared with us personal reflections and recollections regarding the Black experience and racial injustice in the city. Many of the moments they shared coincided with monumental events, places, and figures in AC and the nation's history. They allowed us to peer through their lenses and read a chapter of their books. Some of the topics that appeared in the discussion included redlining, discriminatory practices in employment, Black contributions to the city, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the North Side. We covered such a great deal of information during the call, and we really were just scratching the surface. So for today's event, I'd like to tailor the conversation a bit and hyper-focus on specific recollections from each participant's interview. So last time we opened our discussion with our elders. However, this time around, we decided to flip the script and hear from our students' voices first. So we're joined today by two of our student participants, Tina Byrne, who actually graduated last semester after taking this class, and Sam Apple, who is currently a Stories of AC intern. And we made the connection to her through this project. So before we hear the students, I'd like to share a short video compilation. The clip includes a few of the seniors discussing the written and unwritten rules of AC's past. This will then lead into our first student reflection.
Is it playing?
I'm sorry, are we not hearing it?
It's not playing for us.
Okay, let me stop share and try again. I'm sorry about that.
Don't worry, you're doing good.
Okay, let's run that back and try
not
again.
Weren't allowed.
Can we hear now?
That's the
Got it, great.
what is outlined in the yellow. That's the area that Blacks had to stay in when we lived in Atlantic City back in the 30s, 40s, even up to 50s, maybe definitely up to the 50s. And I don't know if it was by law or not, but we just did. You weren't allowed to bathe uptown in what they call now the inlet. You couldn't go near the basin area. You couldn't go, obviously, on the beaches. There was only one beach we were allowed on, and that was Missouri Avenue, the Missouri Avenue beach. We weren't allowed to go and eat at restaurants on the south side. There were movie theaters on the boardwalk and Atlantic Avenue. We weren't allowed to go to those. We only had one movie theater. Blacks didn't work on the boardwalk.
We grew up when you couldn't go, you could go, but you knew that you shouldn't go across Atlantic Avenue. We stayed on the north side because everything was over here. The north side was a thriving community. We had dentists, doctors, lawyers, grocery stores, so many things that technically when I was a child, I didn't know about segregation because it was normal, you know, and our parents told us don't go there, so we didn't go there. So we didn't know in a way until we got to be teenagers that we weren't wanted over
there. Was a tendency of people who came to Atlantic City to work in the hotel industry, and when they came to Atlantic City, they had jobs as doormen, butlers. They had jobs as chambermaids. They worked as cooks. They worked in the hotel, but they're only permitted to live in one section of Atlantic City. It's called the North Side, and the barriers were from Connecticut Avenue to Arkansas Avenue, from Atlantic Avenue back to Venice Park. That was an area that was redlined for people who look like me.
So as you can see, there were a lot of places and a lot of things that people of color could not do, even up north in places like Atlantic City. So I'd like to go into our first student reflection. Oops, there we go. All right. So for those of you who may not know what redlining is a discriminatory pattern of disinvestment and obstructive lending practices that act as an impediment to home ownership among African Americans and other people of color. Banks use the concept to deny loans to homeowners and would-be homeowners who lived in these neighborhoods. So basically, redlining was an underhanded tactic used by the US government to maintain segregation. I'm going to share a quote from one of our students involved in this project, and then I'm going to invite our first student, Tina, to share a bit of her reflections. So student stated, I learned so much about the experiences of people of color in Atlantic City and the United States in general. During the 50s and 60s, I didn't realize just how prevalent things like racism, segregation, and redlining were in Atlantic City until participating in this project. Each elder had unique experiences, yet a lot of what they had to say intertwined. For instance, all of the elders talked about where they could and couldn't go as a Black person. I'm sure that many white people during these times didn't even have to think about how redlining affected their communities. So Tina, conducting these interviews seemed to have really been an eye-opener for many of your classmates. Can you share your personal thoughts on this particular quote and tell us whether or not you had a similar experience?
Definitely. So hi, everyone. My name is Tina, like Christina said. But I totally agree with the quote. I mean, last time I'm from North Jersey, so last time I shared that I didn't know much about Atlantic City or its history. And I think this is Paul's quote, but he was also in my group, and he really highlighted, like, we normally think of racism and like civil rights from a Southern perspective. We think of like Birmingham, Alabama, but we don't really think of what was going on here. And I feel like a lot of people try to make light of it and say, oh, what was happening in the North wasn't so bad, or it wasn't as bad as what was happening in the South. But as we heard last time, Miss Jane Gadsden Rice said that, you know, it wasn't that much better. It might have been more covert, but, you know, there really were a lot of challenges, especially redlining. And I think nearly all of the elders that we interviewed mentioned it. So I would say that, you know, you can't really judge the way things were for groups of people unless you hear from them and their experiences, because just because they were in the South doesn't mean that they didn't deal with anything, so.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. We're going to go ahead and toss it to Sam. I gave her a few other quotes from our students to reflect on. So first I'll share those reflections, and then Sam, you can jump in and, offer your thoughts. So first, the elders taught me a lot about Atlantic City's history and the people who live in it. I have a totally different perspective on AC. I wish everyone could have had the experience that I had. And next, Atlantic City has a rich, amazing history, and it is the root of so much innovation and social triumph. It has overcome a lot and has become stronger in the process. So Sam, after considering these students' thoughts, I'd like to know your perception about the city's history, its present, and its potential future, and how has that changed since the onset of the project?
Yeah, so actually, I think I said that first quote in our first presentation. So that's like exactly how I felt about AC now, because I'm from Central Jersey. So all I knew about Atlantic City was that, it had the beach and the boardwalk and all the casinos, and that was really it. And then I took the civil rights class last semester, and it opened me up to so much more about Atlantic City. And when I interviewed the two elders, I learned that they were a huge part of Atlantic City's history, even if they were just two people. I learned so much more about just everything about Atlantic City, and I've learned more doing the internship, and my perspective has completely changed. I've visited Atlantic City like 3 or 4 times now since I started the internship, and I've gone to a lot of restaurants and things in AC, and I think it is such a city that has been has such a huge stigma around it, and it shouldn't, because it's so much fun to go there and see all the people and learn about people's experiences. So that's what, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sam. And I wanted to offer Dr. Morus a chance to offer some insight as well, being the professor for this class, if you want to just add anything to what our students said.
Just that universally across the board, all of the students who participated in this project responded in both anonymous surveys and sort of credited answers about the extent to which they learned so much from the experience, both about Atlantic City and about the sort of trajectory of racial injustice, right? I think that in our culture, we value hearing from people who've experienced things, right? We value the Holocaust survivor story. We like to hear these stories. They give us a connection. And I think that the students meeting actual people who lived through these moments in history, it's been meaningful for the students because it puts it in a more sort of solid context. It isn't just something you read about. It's something that happened to your friends and your neighbors and, et cetera. So I feel like seeing how excited the students actually got about this project has been really the most sort of enriching part for me, because it's a really important time in history for us to make those immediate connections between the people that we know and we see every day and the racial injustices in our country.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You made some great points. Yeah, I think that sense of connectivity is really what brings things to life. You hear these stories on the news or in other places, and if you don't have any real sense of connection to it, they won't really impact you as much. But when it's your neighbors you're hearing from, people around you, your family members, your friends, it really connects to us in a different way. So thank you for sharing that perspective. So now we're going to go to our seniors. I'd like to shift over to them. I'm going to take you on a trip through each of their interviews and ask them about particular moments throughout. So before we dive into their questions, I'd like to take a brief moment for introductions. The 4 elders joining us today are Mr. Ron Jordan, Ms. Alfreda Mills, Ms. Alma Walker, and returning from part 1, Mr. Michael Stafford. So Mr. Ron Jordan was born and resided in Atlantic City for his entire life. He describes himself as having sand in his shoes. He was a man of many trades and at some point played a role in Atlantic City's government. Mr. Ron Jordan, who was a lover of sports, is truly AC's #1 fan. During his interview, he exclaimed that he's had an 86-year-long love affair with this city, and he's not going anywhere. Recently, the 2100 block of Murray Avenue in Atlantic City was named Ronald Godfather Jordan Sr. Avenue as a dedication to his many contributions to AC. So that is our lovely Mr. Ron Jordan. Next, we have Ms. Alfreda Mills. She was born and resided in Atlantic City for most of her life. She's a retired teacher who once worked in Galloway Township. She worked with special needs pre-K students. Although this fashionable lady no longer formally teaches, she enjoys sharing her stories and experiences in educating young people. Next, we have Ms. Alma Walker. She was born and raised in Atlantic City as well. She worked at the Atlantic City High School for 8 years and eventually moved to Washington, D.C. to work for IBM. She later returned home to AC. Throughout her adult life, Ms. Alma was a member of the National Council of Negro Women, the Church Women United, and an active member of her church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Atlantic City. And last but not least, we have Mr. Michael Stafford, affectionately known as Mr. Michael Lovejoy. He's lived in AC for 27 years of his life by way of Mississippi and California. For the last 15 years, he's been working in security and truancy, a job he says he chose because he wanted to provide for his community. He currently works within the Atlantic City School District. So these are the 4 lovely seniors you're here from. I know we've been having some technical difficulties with Ms. Alma, but hopefully we can work that out by the time we get to her. So first, I'd like to start with Mr. Ron Jordan. In your interview, you spoke to a very specific moment and not just AC's history, but the nation's history. Many of our seniors talked about their admiration and appreciation for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but you got to actually meet him at the 1964 Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City. This is a convention that famed Fannie Lou Hamer, who you are also able to witness, gave her electrifying testimony, which eventually led to the passing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. I'd like to insert a quick history lesson here because this moment is so intricately tied to AC. So Fannie Lou Hamer played an integral role in the fight for voting rights for Black people. She grew up in Mississippi as a sharecropper, and it wasn't until 1962, which was just 2 years before that monumental moment in AC, that she got involved in the fight for Black voter rights. Due to her involvement in this movement and her attempt to register to vote, she was forced to leave the plantation that she worked for. She became a full-time field worker for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and on her way home from a training, her bus was intercepted by the police. She, alongside a few others, were jailed and beat mercilessly, leaving her blind in one eye and with permanent kidney damage. After this, she began touring the country and sharing her story and challenging the legitimacy of Mississippi's all-white Democratic Party. Her speech in Atlantic City, however, was a turning point in her life and in this country. It was so powerful that then President Lyndon Johnson felt threatened enough to preempt her televised testimony with an impromptu press conference. Luckily, her story ended up being broadcast on all major networks that evening, and a few years later, she became the first African-American to take a seat as an official delegate at a national party convention since the Reconstruction period after the Civil War, and the first woman ever from Mississippi. So I just wanted to mention that because not many people are aware of that significant and historic moment that happened right here in our backyards. And that's absolutely something to be proud of. So now I'm going to go ahead and shift to Mr. Jordan. So let's take a trip right on over to your interview on our website. So I'm going to pull up our page and go right to Mr. Jordan.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see a lot of my friends there. I see you say Alma Walk, I say Bootsy. You say Alfreda Mills, I say Alfreda.
We're having some technical difficulties.
So it brings back, let's get right to it. You know, when beginning, hold on, technical difficulties again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you good now.
Okay, okay. Here's what I'm saying. 1964 was quite the year. We were all in Atlantic City looking for the convention to come to Atlantic City, because not only would it put a spotlight on Atlantic City, the business. So I remember that that day in December of that year, prior to '63, my son was born. So when the convention started, I said to my wife, let's go down to the convention. She says, I can't go away and leave this 7-month-old child. So my sister-in-law came down and we went to the convention. And, you know, it was kind of just before Martin Luther King, because if you say Martin Luther King 10 years later, you couldn't get on the boardwalk, it would be crowded. But at the convention, it was maybe about 200 or 300 of us. We got there and we saw this man and Martin Luther King, and he spoke real well, and he had some of his associates, Ralph Abernathy, Andrew Young with him. It was really quite inspiring. And when that portion was over, you just moved over a little bit, and then Fannie Lou Hamer was there presenting her case. The Mississippi delegation was all white, and as traditional, Mississippi has been a large percentage of Black people, and they wanted to be represented. So that was her chance to be represented by going to the Democratic Convention. And as the rally was breaking up and we turned to start home, this lady came and she said, how would you like to go into the convention? And we said, are you kidding? Of course we did. So she gave us 2 tickets. We sat in the guest section. The delegates sat on the floor, but on the main floor, but the guests sat up in a balcony. And it was funny because they were going through a lot of procedural motions for the convention, all in favor, aye, nay, so and so. And then the guy who was leading it said, will the people in the balconies please stop voting? So it was a rather humorous moment. We were really taking part in it. And then after it was all over, if you've been in convention hall, you know, to get down to the ground level, you have to go down the escalators. So my sister-in-law and I were going down the escalators. And when we hit bottom, you just felt something was different. And I looked over there to the right, and who was standing there but President Lyndon Johnson. Mm-hmm. And I put my hand out, he put his hand out, and we shook hands. And it was really, really an exciting moment. And I remember he had a Secret Service with him, but they were also New Jersey State Troopers with him. And after I shook the hand, one of the troopers looked at me and said, you're never gonna wash that hand again, are you? Which was quite humorous, but that's just one day in a really, really rich life to be able to take part in those 3 momentous events. So.
Wow, 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 wow. I can only imagine that moment for you. Wow. You were a part of history. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, these are the beautiful things that do happen in Atlantic City. And I'm so happy that you were able to experience that, because that's definitely something that you'll be able to leave in your legacy, right?
Absolutely.
So that's amazing. And I did want to share, you can find, of course, all this information on Mr. Ron Jordan's interview, once again, on our website. And I also just wanted to scroll down to this picture. And this is a picture of African-American and white supporters from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party outside of Boardwalk Hall, holding their protesting signs. So I thought that was a great connection there. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. So now we're going to go to Miss Alfreda Mills. So we're going to go back over to our website and find Miss Alfreda Mills. And let's see if we can unmute her so she can chime in. So as we unmute her, I'm going to pull her up. So I wanted to talk with Alfreda Mills today about the education system in AC. So you, amongst other elders, praise the AC school system for everything it instilled in you as a young Black person. Many of you spoke of the enriching experiences and the inspirational, caring teachers that you had throughout elementary school. But then in high school, things began to shift. And this was due to the fact that up until the high school level, AC schools were segregated. and the AC High, of course, was integrated. So this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. However, many of you did express that that's when you became more racially aware. So I wanted to ask you a bit about that. So first, I'm going to go to the actual question in your interview.
Okay.
Are you unmuted? I hear something now. Miss Alfreda Mills?
Yes,
Okay, there you are. Hey.
here I am.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go through your interview a bit and go to that question,
Yes,
and share a little bit about your experience. And then I'm going to offer you
yes.
A prompt because we want to know about that, how that transition was for you. So as you can see, I'm just walking you through her lovely interview. She also has so many great tidbits to share. So here we are. In what ways did the educational system shape your racial identity? So I'm just going to briefly go through this response. Ms. Mills noted that to her teachers were absolutely wonderful. While Ms. Mills expressed that she did not enjoy having her knuckles hit with a ruler, she did say that most of her Black teachers, particularly her 4th grade teacher, were caring towards and protective of their students. Most of the teachers that I had were wonderful, wonderful teachers. They just loved us and poured everything into us that they thought we needed to know. When she entered high school, which was integrated, things changed. Yeah, the teachers there were definitely prejudiced and they didn't hide it, Ms. Mills said. They would say nasty things, you know, but to me personally, in my high school days, the only teacher that was like that was a history teacher. You could be walking down the hall, going somewhere, and instead of her paying attention to her own class, she'd run out the door and holler at you. What are you doing in the hallway? This was targeted especially at Black kids. She was just all over us. Ms. Mills was not dissuaded by prejudice or harassment and became intent on success. I said, okay, I've got your number. I'll get all A's in your class. And then I did. After doing well, I guess she regarded me as one of them, you know, like one of the white kids. I did not have white friends in those days. They knew who I was, I knew who they were, and we were in the halls and they may speak or wave, but they were not social with Black kids in high school. The separation, Ms. Mills said, was not limited to just white folks. Every group was with their group, she noted. The white students went over there, the Black students sat over here, everyone was apart. So I just wanted to ask you, Ms. Mills, a little bit about your experience, and could you just tell us how that transition was for you, going from these segregated schools into this high school that is now integrated?
Okay. Well, most of what you have here before me is exactly the way it was. As Mr. Jordan and several other people have said, when we grew up in Atlantic City, we were in a subscribed area. And so we did not have to or even get to know white people. We were in our neighborhood. We had a neighborhood that had everything we needed and all kinds of role models and people of great distinction. And any adult was able to correct you if you were doing anything wrong. For children of that time, we were not wild or rambunctious, or you would not get on people's grass or mark on their houses or do anything that was destructive. So when a parent or an adult spoke to you, you said yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am, and you listened to what they had to say. So during the time that I was in elementary school, those were wonderful times, very wonderful. We had teachers, like I said before, they knew what we were going to be going to when we left them at the elementary school. So they made sure we just knew everything as much as they could put in us and keep in us. So when we graduated and had our graduation ceremonies at New Jersey Avenue School, then we went down to the high school that following September. Like I said, this particular history teacher was known by every Black kid in that school because at some time or another, she had said something to them when they were walking through the hallways or going about their business. We were not in the hallway just to be in the hallway. You were on your way somewhere. And then she would say, go to the office. And then you'd go to the office and then Mr. Hollenbach would say, who sent you? And you say, that teacher. And he said, oh, just go around her. Don't pay any attention. Just keep going. You know, she's just cranky. I'll use that word. So the kids got used to her and they just didn't pay too much more attention to her. But the thing about her was, and she and several other teachers, they did not hide their prejudice. You know, they would say off, well, I can't remember anything specific, but, you know, something that you knew wasn't correct. And then you weren't going to stand up and correct them, you know, as they were saying something about the Negro race or something that was in the press or something. You just listened to what they said and how they said it. But in my high school days, I think I had a good time with the children that we came there with. The high school had a mixed team of basketball, football, all of those kinds of sports and things. We would go to the games. And then when the basketball games would be on the north side at the Black Young Men's Christian Association, which was on Arctic Avenue, they played white teams. And then when that was over, we would have dances and have a good time. So most of my teen years were wonderful, I think. I enjoyed them and, you know, made friends with, after a while, friends that I made friends with some of the white students who were in my class, especially like Charlotte Eccles, who sat in front of me, Martin Blatt, who sat behind me, Norman Fisher, and a few others. And when I go back to my classroom reunions, I think we just had our 65th, can you believe that? 65th reunion of the Atlantic City High School class of 1952. It's just about 25 of us that show up. Many of them have passed on and many of them don't live in Atlantic City anymore. But it's very nice to have the opportunity to see them and reminisce about the old days. One of the things that was mentioned in 1964, my husband, who is an architect, was working at a office which was on the back side of the convention center. The old convention center was a block, whole block, took up a whole block. And on the Pacific Avenue side, there were offices. And he worked in one of the offices of one of the, in Martin Blatt, I guess he had an architectural office there. So when the convention came to Atlantic City, the Democratic Convention, he had the opportunity to help set up some of the places and things inside the convention center that all of the people who were coming would be using. So he was able to get a lot of the souvenir things, like all the way with LBJ, that was the slogan. And it was like on a plastic thing that had red, white, and blue, like the flag. And he brought it home to my children, our children. And my youngest child fell in love with it because he could put it on his tricycle, and my husband attached it to his handlebars, and he would drive right around the neighborhood saying, LBJ, all the way with LBJ. And he thought that was very cute. But I did get to hear Fannie Lou Hamer make her plea to be seated at that convention. And she was very touching. And I think she knew that wasn't going to happen. But anyway, she made history by just being there and forcefully making herself seen and heard so that she could tell her story. Now, the president, I did not get to see him except on TV, but I think my husband had a chance to see him because he was working in that area and got to say hello to him. So that was quite an exciting time. But long before LBJ, the fighter for the west side and the north side was Mr. Horace Bryant, who after 2 tries became the first Black commissioner in the city of Atlantic City. And he was a big, robust man, and he wasn't afraid to use his booming voice. And he would speak up in the council meetings when things were not going right in the city. So he was our first fighter, in addition to the NAACP and all of the wonderful people who worked then. Mr. Pierre Hollingsworth, my husband, and I'm trying to think of the other young fellow. I can't think of his name right now. But that's my story.
Wow. Wow. So I told you so many tidbits to share, right? She's still educating us even till this day. Thank you so much for those recollections. That's awesome that your husband also got to experience that convention and that you got to witness Dr. Martin Luther King as well. And even though Fannie Lou Hamer didn't win that year, I believe it was about 4 years later that she did end up winning a seat. And Atlantic City was that turning point for her. So we're going to acknowledge Atlantic City for that. We're going to take the credit for that. But thank you so much for sharing. So now I'd like to toss it to Ms. Alma Walker, and I'm not sure, I see her name, but I'm wondering if she's still having technical difficulties.
Yeah, I think we should see if we can ask her to unmute. We're not clear if she's on that way or there we go.
Great, there we go. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm so happy it worked out.
Finally.
Yes, great. So welcome, Ms. Alma Walker. We're so happy to have you with us and that we were able to work through everything.
I'm just so glad.
Yes,
I'm just so glad to be a part of this, believe me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to chat with you today about your involvement in the National Council of Negro Women. So I'm going to go to your page. And as I do, I can just give a little background. So in your interview, when asked about an organization or a movement that influenced your definition of what it meant to be Black, you mentioned the National Council of Negro Women, which is funny. I actually was a part of this organization as well when I went to college at Howard. But you also mentioned at one point being a liaison between your church and your church, which is the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and the national organization. So for you, I'd absolutely like to share a snippet that you shared during your interview, and then we can go into some of your recollections.
Well, thank you so much again. In my early childhood days, there was only 1 week in February that was the time you observed Negro History Week. So now we have a whole month to reflect. And then March being the Women's History Month, it's a perfect time to discuss the National Council of Negro Women, and in particular, Mary McLeod Bethune. As a child, when you're learning about the Blacks of the past, it was Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver and some other, but it was always Mary McLeod Bethune, who was someone who was very, very much into education. And in her early years, when she talked about school, it was what we had learned in our schools and even in our Sunday schools, which made us want to be more involved and to be able to be like her. In 1904, she opened her first school for girls. And she said it was with faith in God and $1.50. That school later became Bethune-Cookman in Daytona Beach, Florida. She fought strongly for women's rights. And in 1935, that's when she created the National Council of Negro Women, to bring together the major Black organizations to become a strong voice for the more than 800,000 members. And you spoke of being a part of that in college. There are actually 30 colleges that had the NCNW sectors. I never had the opportunity to meet her. I wish I had. I guess just being in the organization, which she organized in 1935, the Women's Missionary Society of the African Methodist Episcopal Church was there at the original organization, and we're still there. We are one of 38 affiliates, and those affiliates are sororities and various sectors and people as well. Almost any female organization is one of the affiliates for National Council, because she felt very strongly that in numbers there's strength. I think when my job transferred me to the Washington area, and I could resume my interest in NCNW as well as my church there, I had no thought that I would end up being as involved as I was with the National Council. If you knew anything about the National Council, you know that the names Mary McLeod Bethune and Dorothy Irene Height are synonymous. In fact, it was Dorothy Height who succeeded Miss McLeod Bethune. I was appointed the liaison by the Connectional Women's Missionary Society. When I say the Connectional, that involves churches where we have them all over the United States, Africa, the Caribbean, even now in India. And as I said, it was quite an honor. Believe me, I got to meet Dr. Height, and I got to spend time with her on various occasions and so forth. It's something that it would take me some time to even try to explain the honor. I can remember one time coming home from work and getting answering my phone messages. There, this was message: Mrs. Walker, this is Dorothy Height. She was Dr. Dorothy Height, but she did not acknowledge herself as doctor. It was just, this is Dorothy Height. I need to talk to you at your earliest convenience. Please give me a call. And here I am, Dorothy Height calling me Mrs. Walker, and then telling me at my convenience to call her because she needed to talk to me. You have no idea how often I played that over and over. It was just such an honor. I got to meet a lot of prominent women within the country. I mean, and even outside of the country, because when you had your various meetings, you just never know who was going to be there. And then for your special occasions, it was not unusual to see an Oprah or a Myra and Camille and so many, like I said, prominent Black women. I think so much of that organization. And since I've been back home here, I have not had an opportunity to attend some of the meetings as I'd like, but I do keep in touch with people who are very much involved. I proudly have a certificate that was given to me in 2003, and it was on the 128th birthday celebration, the Mary McLeod Bethune Achievement Award, presented to Alma A. Walker in honor of service, commitment, and achievement in the Bethune tradition. So as I said, it wasn't hard for me to become involved and to want to be a part of such a magnificent organization. And one of the other things I want to mention, while I was with that group and I was still working in the Washington area, 12 of us were chosen to go to the White House when Reagan was president. It was during the time that Nancy Reagan was talking about just say no, just say no. And she wanted women to come there to discuss it, to see how we could promote her program. And while waiting for her to come in, the vice president at that time, who was the senior Bush, he came in and sat and talked and joked with us. And when she finally came in and he said, "Oh, I was just entertaining your company." And she said, "Oh, I just can't wait to hear what you told them." And he said, "It was all clean." But, as I said, it was an opportunity that I will long remember. And I'm just so blessed that I could be a part of it. So I think I've told you. And one other thing as well. There's a building, 633 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, which Dorothy Height used to call her the house. That's the house that we purchased for the NCNW. She wanted it to be between the White House and the Capitol building, and that's where it is. This building, when you're in the area and say that belongs to us, I hope you have an opportunity to see it someday. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Walker. Wow. You too have lived such a life full of rich events and historic moments. That is so wonderful. And I'm so happy that you had those experiences. Not only were you making history here in Atlantic City, but apparently you were doing the same thing in DC. So yes. That is wonderful. I was going to play an audio clip from your interview, but I think you covered it. We're good. So thank you once again. Thank you so much. And lastly, we're going to jump to Mr. Michael Stafford. If you were here before, then you absolutely remember this young man and his poignant words. So we are going to pull up his interview. And so now we're going to take, Ms. Alma Walker already took us to the DC. I thought Mr. Stafford was going to take us there. But once again, we're going to take our trip from AC to DC. And he talked specifically in his interview about his experience at the Million Man March that took place on March 16th in 1995. So I wanted to ask him a bit about that moment. So Mr. Stafford, if you are unmuted, you can join.
Yes, I'm unmuted, yes.
So, yes, I just wanted you to describe the feeling that you had coming from this small but mighty city of 48 blocks to marching at the nation's capital alongside almost 1 million men that look like you. Could you just walk us through that impactful moment?
Well, I want to thank you once again for allowing me to come before you and the august body here to talk about my experience. Well, when the word went out from the Honorable Mr. Farrakhan in reference to going to Washington, D.C. and calling 1 million men, it was like an atomic bomb had went off, because it resonated with all Black men who yearned that we would get together one day, not to sing, not to dance, not to make music, not to drink, but to get together on a platform that we could come together and be one. Our foreparents, our mothers, our fathers, they always wanted to come together, but were never allowed to congregate without those individuals who were sent from the other community to come in and listen and eavesdrop and listen to see what we were saying, watch what we were doing. And when the word went out and it got close to the time to go, you know, people was trying to find a way to go. We rented buses to go down here. Philadelphia rented buses. Wilmington, Delaware rented buses. All the little cities and towns. And on the way down, you would find people on the side of the freeway walking from Philadelphia, from Atlantic City to Washington, D.C. to be there at that august moment when the Honorable Mr. Farrakhan called 1 million to come to Washington, D.C. to atone, to seek responsibility for what we have done and for reconciliation with one another. But first of all, reconciliation to the principles, statutes, and ordinances of Almighty God. It was a beautiful day. He called for 1 million, 2 million showed up. The National Park Service tried to undermine the count and say it was 500,000. Obama's inauguration didn't top 1 million. It didn't top 2 billion, as opposed to what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan called. Donald Trump, President 45, his inauguration didn't call 500,000 or 1 million or much less 2 million to come to Washington, D.C. And on that day, men like Will Smith and other entertainers dropped to the ground crying because they had been yearning for a day like this. But I want you to take notice that here's a man who is a Muslim who called for this Day of Atonement, reconciliation, and responsibility. But it was 75%, 80% Christians that showed up to the call of this Muslim preacher of freedom, justice, and equality. So it was a beautiful day. I cried like a baby because I had longed and yearned for a day like this, that our women could be proud of us, that on this day we prayed. On this day, we would be dedicated to go back and start joining organizations, joining churches, joining the mosques, joining the synagogues, wherever we came from. That on that day, after we heard the message from the minister, we would go back to our communities and make a difference. And you can see the government had the troops down in the tunnels under the mall, waiting for something to jump off, thinking that we was going to turn on one another. Another brother was going to pull a Malcolm trick and say, get your hand out of my pocket, and come out with a gun and start blazing. Minister Farrakhan told them to leave your weapons at home. He told the sisters, the women folk, to stay at home. And then the rabble rousers, the mischief makers, tried to take those words about asking the sisters to stay at home, the women folk to stay at home. You send your man to Washington, D.C. to atone and become more responsible and reconcile, first of all, with God and one with each other. They tried to make mischief with that, but none of that would be able to overcome the beauty, the calm, the love that was shown on that day. And the president at that time was President Bill Clinton. He left town. The Congress shut down. The Senate shut down. The Supreme Court was not adjudicating any cases. They shut down. So this is a demonstration for us to know that when we come together on the principle of reconciliation and atoning for what we have done and what we have not done, and responsibility, taking the responsibility. Did you know, Sister Christina, that millions and hundreds of thousands of Black children were adopted out of the adoption system because men went back to adopt kids? Child support was starting to get paid when Black men was not paying child support for their children. Crime had gone down. There was nothing for the police departments and the FBI and all of the other alphabet organizations. There was nothing for them to do because of this august and very momentous call that was made by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I thank God for that man for making that call, because we're going to be called again for atonement, reconciliation, and responsibility, not in the form of a march necessarily, but in the form of our own personal life as we struggle to get through this pandemic.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You always come with the power. I love it. I always learn something myself, so thank you for sharing that recollection.
Well, Sister Christina, you know, this is the power hour that we're in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you shared some great tidpoints. I think it's important that you talked about how the troops were ready and standing by, and the president wasn't there.
Absolutely, they're standing by right now. They're standing by right now.
The similarity, right? We see the similarity with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes, ma'am.
And it really just tells you, it shows you the prejudices and the biases based around certain people. And this is why it's so necessary to share our stories, because that's how we really start to shift the narrative of what's often portrayed, which is what we do have Stories at AC. So thank you for that. And I also love how you pointed out, the power in numbers. Even though this was a call from a Muslim leader, you had Christians out there, you had everyone out there standing for one cause, and that's really where the power lies. So thank you for that. So before we jump into our question and answer portion, I just wanted to share one more video. So as we know, we've come so far as a people in this country, but we still have so very far to go. It's been an uphill battle that has spanned over generations, but because of people like the elders and students on this call, and all of you, we as a nation have been able to dredge through the muck and come out triumphant time and time again. It is through conversations like the one we had on today, ones that cross lines of color, generation, gender, and creed, that this country will begin to heal and pivot in the right direction. I admire the fortitude of all of our participants, and I admire the courage to be vulnerable and authentic, and I deeply appreciate their amenability to share their stories. So as a bit of encouragement, I wanted to share this compilation video of some of our seniors talking about their thoughts on today's generation and the faith and hope that they have in them.
They know more than you think they know. It's just that you don't want to give up your seat of privilege at the table to these young people. The young people have been integrated, meaning that you have been going to school with Black people for many, many years. Young people have been hip-hopped, meaning that you've been affected by the hip-hop culture. So the hip-hoppers are writing and rapping about their experiences with the police, their experiences with racists and racism. And you hear this.
And I'll tell you, millennials are used to being around Black people. Millennials, because of the way it is today, might have some Black people as their best friends. So the millennials are starting to move up. It's the older people. It's the 170s or 80s that's set in their habits.
Bottom of my heart, and that is this Black Lives Matter is the most powerful thing that happened, and I'm delighted I lived long enough to see it. This is for real this time. These Black kids, white America, really understand the injustice that's been done to people of color, and they feel as though that, I feel as though that this movement is going to really, really take root.
So that was just some of the reflections from our elders. And like I said, it just really showed the hope and faith that they have in this generation, that things are going to change with this generation because we're not going to take it anymore. So that was really just a blessing to hear that they had so much faith in them. So now I'm going to go ahead and toss to Aaron for our question and answer segment of the event. So if you have your questions, I know you've been dropping some things in the chat. We're going to go through that now, and this is where you also can offer your own reflections and comments.
Yeah, so far we only have one question, though I'm sure some more might come in, and that is actually from Miss Mills. How would you explain your experience at Stockton versus your experience at high school?
It looks like she's muted. Let's ask to unmute. Ms. Mills, do you see something on your screen asking you to unmute? Tap on that again. Looks like she's trying to work it out. Okay. There we go. Okay.
Got it? Yeah. Stockton is a beautiful campus now. It really looks like the university that it is. But when I went there, it was just a conglomeration of buildings starting with the letter A and going all the way up to the PAC Center. You know, one building went into the next all the way through. And the only thing outstanding about those buildings was that it was a lot of light, big windows, and a lot of hallway for movement. And I went back after getting my children out of the house. In the meantime, I had taken some courses that were offered in Atlantic City at the Central Junior High School and, you know, other places where they were offering an English course or a history course or something like that, just to get my feet wet and get back into going back to school. But then I made up my mind, I'm going to Stockton. So I was a commuter. I would get on the bus every morning. I'd catch that 7 o'clock bus. And on that bus was mostly young people going to Stockton. Many of them I knew. And then being on the bus with them, I got to know most of them. And I'd say, as I got on the bus, did you do your homework? Are you ready for your class? You got your books all straight? Everything is ready? And some would turn their heads, you know, because they didn't do their work. Others would say, oh, I'm almost there. And then I say, you know what? You need to stay in the library and stop trying to, you know, chase the boys or the girls chasing the boys, boys chasing the girls. But as an adult and having gone through all of that before, I knew what the kids were dealing with. You know, they're trying to get to know each other. They're trying to get situated in their classes and all of that. So at lunchtime, it would be me and a group of young ladies would sit together and we talk about the classes and what was going on in their lives and things that were bothering them or things that they were upset with. And I mainly told them that while you're here on campus, you need to do the best that you can do. You want to get good grades and graduate from here and move on. So in order to do that, you have to put your head in your books. So I will be in the library. Even before the end of the day, I would go up to the library and try to get all of my work done, because I knew once I got home and had to deal with my children or my husband and dinner and washing clothes and whatever, I wouldn't have enough time to get all of my work done for the next day at school. So I would stay in the library and I said, look, come up to the library. I'll be there. I'll help you. I'll show you where to find whatever it is you are working on. I'll let you learn how to use the library. I'll put you with the librarian and she'll teach you how to use the library. So several of them would take me up on it and they would get their work done. They'd be so happy and I would be so happy for them. Now, I graduated from Stockton with a BA in psychology. And while I was there, I took a course with Dr. Hoxter, whose family, it's a local family. His father was a principal at the old West Side School. His mother was a teacher, and now he's a professor at Stockton, but he had been at other schools before that. So I took this educational course with Dr. Hoxter, and in it, it was an internship. So I said, okay, what school would I be going to in Galloway Township? So Dr. Hoxter said, you can go to Pomona School, which is probably one of the first schools built in Pomona. And I went there to meet Dr. Nyland, who is the principal, to talk with him about my internship. I told him I had Tuesdays and Thursdays free, and that I would come on those days to work, you know, with the students. So he took me on a tour of the building to see the classes and children, and I liked all of them. But when we went into the little trailer out in the just before you get to the play yard, there was a trailer. He took me inside, and there were all the special needs children. And I said, oh, this is where I want to be. These are the children I want to work with. So he said, are you sure? I said, yes, I'm sure. I said, I'll be here 7:45 every morning, sign in. And at that time, the cafeteria lady, the head lady, you had to put your order in by a certain time or you wouldn't get lunch. So he said, the first thing you do after you sign in, go down and put your order in for food. So I would do that. And then I went to the trailer to meet the two teachers. It was a half-day class for these children. There were 8 children in each class, and I worked with those teachers for that whole year, my senior year. And I enjoyed every minute of it. So I said, this is the best experience of my life, to have to work with students who, once that you were able to get through to them, their eyes would just open up and you could see that they understood what you were trying to say or do with them. And so after I finished that year, graduated, it was in August, I got a call from Dr. Dearborn, who was the superintendent of schools in Galloway at that time. And he asked me to come into his office. So I went out to Smithville and went to his office to talk with him. And he said, we'd like to offer you a job at one of our schools here. We just built 2 new schools, Reed's Road and what's the other one? Well, anyway, Reed's Road was where I went to work. And I worked with another teacher named Deborah Silver. And we were like right arm, left arm, when she could not say or do or get to do whatever it was we were trying to do with the child. I would fill in, she would come, we would fill in. We were working with students that had cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism, severe ADHD with hyperactivity, students with behavior problems. I mean, even at a 3 or 4 year old, you wouldn't believe some of the behavior problems that we had. But working with them individually and in a small group, we were able to teach them and bring them to their fullest potential. Their parents were so proud of us that even the parents whose children were normal wanted to be in our class. They said, my child is very shy. She needs to be in your class. I'm trying to get her to talk more. They would come up with all kinds of reasons to be with us. So we made it a combination, especially with the older children in the afternoon. We made it a whole day program, not a half day, but the older children were in the afternoon. And we made it a program where the normal children, or those children who had no disabilities, would be mixed with the children who had disabilities. And that was a genius moment, because the children interacting with each other were able to help each other and even show us some of the things that we had missed. Like one little fella was deaf. We didn't realize he was deaf. So the little girl that liked to play with him would just grab him by his arm and walk him around the room, get a toy, sit in an area. We had areas where they could work, play, little house area, so forth. She would get him to play, and she got him to talk, which was the problem. We couldn't get him to talk because he couldn't hear. And then I kept saying, we need his hearing checked. We need to check his hearing. You know, we'd tell his mom to take him to the doctor. And finally, they found out what the problem was with his ears. But she was the one, Laura would drag little Eric around and make him talk. But it was a wonderful time being at Stockton. I enjoyed all of the professors I had. I enjoyed going to all the performances and things that were offered at the PAC Center. I loved the jazz program. You know, I became a subscriber to the PAC program, and I just enjoyed my time there. And my 22 years working in Galloway Township with children with special needs. See, they got rid of that word handicap and disabilities and used the word special needs, children with special needs. And that was much more appropriate and did not have the stigma of these children being less than. And in the end, many of them were geniuses, absolute geniuses. So that's my story.
Thank you for that. We have another question, which is, and I think we're going to ask Mr. Jordan specifically, if you could describe Atlantic City in a word or two, and what would it be?
You mean the whole city or just our neighborhood?
Well, I think this one is directed to Mr. Jordan, but yeah, the whole city. Yeah.
Mr. Jordan,
Well,
take it away, Ron. Take it away.
okay, Alfreda. You know, if that was today, you know, I would say very promising, because I've seen changes take place over the years that I had never envisioned. I see the leadership in Atlantic City now taking the bull by the horn and moving forward. So I am very encouraged by what I see Atlantic City, let's say. You know, when we were years ago, nobody thought of Atlantic City, but Atlantic City really came to life when those casinos started coming in and pouring billions of dollars into the coffers of the state. And I guess, yeah, that's pretty much what I'd say. Atlantic City, it's on its way. It has good leadership, and I've never seen it in better hands. I used to see, Atlantic City used to be a joke, you know, but now everybody seems to take it serious, and I think we're moving in the right direction. I don't know if that completely answers, but that's just the way I feel about my city, you know. I love it. I've lived here all these years. I wouldn't go anyplace else. I cherish the memories of our friendships over the years, you know, the various people. And it's just a great place to live. It's a great place to grow up. And it's a great place to work and make your living. I know when I came up, there was really no future, because your choices were, when you finished school, you either worked in the restaurants or the hotels, and that was it. And now we have so much more to offer these kids. These kids can go to college and they come back, and there's a future that can be laid out for them. And, you know, with that, I'm eternally grateful. And as I say, I look forward to finishing out my golden years in Atlantic City and see it grow. That's it, Christina.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We already knew you weren't going anywhere. You got that street named after you, so how can you go somewhere else? You got to stay here. You're faithful to us. Well, thank you for sharing that. We have a few other questions here. I'm going to go to this question for Mr. Michael Stafford. Could you talk about the transition between living in the North and the South? Was there a culture shock? Did you notice yourself moving about differently in the North than you did in the South?
Well, yes and no, because to move in the South during the time that I was a young man, young lad, we had to move a certain way. I lived on the other side of the railroad tracks, and we had already been ostracized as being less than or not worth it. So we had a certain code that we went by, and the code was this: be home when the street lights came off, and don't talk back to white folks. And when I got to California, you know, California's West, it's a little more liberal than it was in Mississippi. I found that many of the people who migrated to California from Arkansas, Texas, and Mississippi, and all down south. So most of the people, their roots, Black people in California, their roots are from the South. And many of their ways followed them to California because we had an issue and a problem with oppressive police systems, particularly in Oakland, which gave birth and rise to several different organizations that came together to try to combat the transported Jim Crow rules and laws that came from the South. One organization that was born was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And I put the self-defense on there because that was the original name of the Black Panther Party, because we had to come together for our very, very own self-defense because we were under siege. And the difference between the two is very, very minimal, because down there, they'll tell you exactly how they feel. And up here, they'll tell you how they feel in a roundabout way. In Mississippi, if you didn't know, there's a book called The South's Dirty Little Secret. And it goes into how the state of Mississippi is a major player in the political scene in the United States of America. It goes on to describe that it was there in Mississippi where they finished putting the finishing touches in Vicksburg, Mississippi, which is my hometown, the finishing touches on the nuclear bomb there in Mississippi, which was used to drop on 2 Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, just think, if a man is willing to go that far to drop a bomb on people, just think how far they're willing to go with you in other manners. And the situation hasn't changed. It's not going to change until we come together, like it was at the Million Man March, and atone and ask God for forgiveness for our shortcomings and for what we have done and have not done. And there's a scripture in 7:14 Chronicles that talks about, if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray, then I would do what? I will heal their land. I'm not quoting it specifically, but those church-going people and Bible thumpers know what I'm talking about. There's an action that has to take place in order for this thing to change. And I'll say it like Malcolm X said. There's, Malcolm X said that when you come across a Southern man and he's in his element, he's called the wolf. And when you come across a Northern man and he's in this element, he's called the fox. They're 2 members of the canine family. So they're both brothers, but they're 2 members of the canine family. So there's no difference between the Southern action in the South and the Northern action up here. There's no difference.
Thank you for sharing that. Of course, once again, so many things we could talk about as a derivative from just that quote that you gave and that feedback that you gave. But because we're on time constraint, I see we're out of time. I see there was a few more questions. Unfortunately, we have to cut some of them out. But the last question I'm going to answer or ask, how have you kept the spirit of activism and change alive all these years? What do you do when the world is too heavy, and what keeps you going? And I'm going to talk that to Ms. Alma Walker. How have you kept the spirit of activism alive?
Oh, thank you. I think that the older you get, the more you incline to want to do more and to do it better. I was reflecting too, I want to say this is a little off, but I just want to add this, that during the 40s, Atlantic City High School was considered one of the best, one of the 10 best in the country. And I think that is worth noting, because I think that that's where so many of us got our sort of beginnings as far as getting along with people and doing what's expected of you. But I want to be involved as long as I can be involved. And fortunately, my church affords me that opportunity, because there are not only activities and the need on the local level, but we have several levels in our church. We have a presiding elder level. We have a New Jersey conference level. We have a first district level, which is the churches along the East Coast, and then the connectional, which is throughout, well, I say that we called it the International Church now, but there's so many things. The first Negro Girl Scout troop was organized there at St. James. So as I said, so there's a lot that comes as a result of my working within the church, because we do a lot of, well, it's just not, as I said, local. We do it on all of these different levels, but it's something that keeps you busy. It keeps you active. It keeps you wanting to keep going and to do. And I'm probably the oldest one in this group right now, but I still don't feel as though I'm supposed to sit down. It's like so many of them want you to do now. They're anxious for the older ones to get out of the way. But in my opinion, don't push me out. Just allow me to help you and to show you, because as I said, the things that I enjoy doing, it always involves helping and to showing and so forth. So I think that as far as being active, you can do a lot. I hear so much about the term, the new norm. I don't know what that means, but I just hope that I'm going to be able to be part of that new norm. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing. We could never get rid of you. We have too much life experience and wisdom to share with us young folk. Thank you. And I think that was a great point too, how you talked about doing a lot through your church. It's just a reminder that the church has been a pillar, and especially in the Black community, historically. Yeah. So that was a great point. Thank you all so much. I'm going to share with you my screen once more as a quick plug. We have a few more events coming up. This upcoming Tuesday on March 23rd, we'll have a workshop about money, making smart financial moves, or learning more about financial literacy. And then April 8th, we have a Mind Your Mind workshop coming up. We'll be talking about mental health with local Nate Evans, who works in and around Atlantic City area. And then, of course, if you are not connected with us yet, please go on and check out our website. Check out our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Our website URL is simple. It's simply storiesofatlanticcity.com. And that's also where you'll find all these wonderful intergenerational storytelling interviews. And of course, browse the rest of our website when you get a chance as well. We are so happy that you decided to join us today, even on this dreary day. Thank you for coming out. We really do appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you to our student participants. Thank you to our elders who are here, and for all of you that came out to be part of this. It's really fantastic to have such great participation, and just thank you so much, everybody.
Yes, and am I missing anything, Aaron? We're good? I think we're good.
This was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.